When I was in first grade, I went into my bag during snack time to get my fruit snack out, but to my amazement, it was not in there. I looked around the room and I could see one of my classmates, who usually did not bring a snack to snack time, was eating a snack that looked exactly like what I had brought in. This happened again the second day. And by this point, I decided I was going to tell my grandma what was happening. And so my grandma, her reaction was not at all what I expected. My grandma said, "Well, Jay, you are going to take a snack to that young boy every day for the rest of the school year." I couldn't believe she said that. I was outraged. I had hoped that maybe she would call the principal or write a letter to my teacher or go in and say something to the student or tell me to confront him or a place to hide my food. But none of these were her response. Her response was to do this act of love. And so I went in the next day, very resistant, uncomfortable, didn't really want to do it, but my grandma told me to do it. And I offered him up this fruit snack. He sort of sheepishly took it, kind of wondering, I think, if I knew that he knew that he'd stolen my things. But he took it. And every single day, the rest of the school year, I would give him a snack at the beginning of the hour. He would eat it, and my other snack would never disappear. That taught me a really valuable lesson. My grandma is a Christian, and my grandma taught me the importance of loving people and not always assuming the worst about them, and to not always assume that we know what they think or where they're coming from or what struggles that they may have or why they even believe the way they do. And I feel that this has definitely affected the way that I view the world today. We live in a country where there's a lot of divides. We've got people who are divided over the topic of race and sexuality and gender and citizen and immigration status and language barriers and food differences. And we live in a very diverse country and world where people hold different ideals and values and oftentimes even political parties. And it can be difficult when you are engaging with someone who thinks differently than you, who lives differently than you, who acts differently than you, who has a different worldview than you, to try to love them and to be compassionate, especially when it rubs up against what's comfortable, especially when you feel like they're stepping on your territory or stealing your fruit snacks or doing something that you don't feel is acceptable or right. But I believe that the faith that my grandma has instilled in me, that is the faith in Jesus, is best embodied when Jesus is having this conversation with a group of leaders. This group of leaders ask Jesus a question. They say, "What is the greatest commandment?" If you know anything about the Bible or anything about religion, oftentimes people associate that thing with a lot of laws and rules and expectations. And so these leaders are asking, sum it up for us, make it simple. And Jesus does. Jesus says that really all of the laws, all of the Bible can be summed up in this kind of one-word sentence, which is to love God. That's not this one-word sentence, just this one sentence. To love God and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. It can be difficult to love your neighbor if you don't first love yourself. There has to be an acceptance and a comfortability with who you are. But I think that comes when you begin to understand who God made you to be, how He created you, and the way that you were created, and that who you are as a being is a good and beautiful and beloved thing. And I think out of the overflow of that, you can begin to extend love and grace and patience and understanding with people in a way that can build bridges instead of tear them down. I could have easily dealt with that situation in first grade very differently than what my grandma showed me. But because I dealt with it in a loving way, in a compassionate way, in an understanding way, not assuming anything, not condemning him, but instead doing something that was perhaps countercultural or counterintuitive, I was able to actually make a friend. And I was able to actually show the love of Christ and really the love of a neighbor to him. And so this is what I want to challenge you to think about is, what is it that sort of dictates your life decisions? Have you chosen to maybe resist your first inkling and instead to maybe consider embracing this idea that loving God and loving your neighbor as you love yourself would be a much healthier principle for this world? It's a principle that Jesus presents, and it's a principle that Jesus continually lives by as he encounters people who don't always look like him, who aren't always maybe living the way he thinks that they should live, yet he meets them where they are and he loves them, and he calls them out to make better choices, to live a better life, to love people wholeheartedly. And so I challenge you now to consider that. How is it that you can choose to love people, to love God, and to love your neighbor, as you love yourself? May you explore this new and amazing possibility of following God in this way.